morning, Sarah.
Good morning, Jody.
This is a prime time for me to say thank you for all you are doing for the congregation. You are currently the
Vocation Director.
Vocation Director for how many years now?
This is just number 2.
Sara Fairbanks. From whence did you come?
I was born in Vermont.
Vermont, the state of Vermont.
The state of Vermont, Springfield, Vermont.
Do you know of anyone else in our congregation before or current?
I don't know if we have any Vermonters other than me.
Well, first of all, how could you leave Vermont and land in the cornfield? So, I mean, the beauty of that state is...
I know. And you know, Jody, Vermont is gorgeous. And, but at the same time, I went to college in Pennsylvania and, got into New York City and then to Florida. So I was in a lot of different states. And the thing I see is I have a real love for nature, but it's just different dimensions of that beauty in the other states. So,
do you have family still living in Vermont?
I do. So I would get home a couple times a year.
And who?
Well,
siblings?
yeah, my parents are both died, but I have an older sister who's married with a son, and I have 2 older brothers who have children. So,
and that's it as far as siblings?
Then I have a twin sister who who is actually in Florida at the time.
A Vermont twin.
Yes.
And are you what do they call it? Identical twins?
No, we're fraternal twins.
Fraternal twins.
Yeah.
But what a delight, because when you were in Florida, you just spent how many years in Florida?
Well, I was 20 years in Florida at Barry University so that was great. And the last 7, I was there 3 years in campus ministry. Then I went off and did my doctorate in theology and came back and taught theology for 17 years. The chair of my department, who's a Southern Province Dominican, Mark Wittig, had said, 2 professors of philosophy are retiring, because we had a department of theology and philosophy. Do you ever think your sister and her husband would come and work at Barry?
Oh my.
And I said, no, I don't think so. Because why would New Englanders come to Florida, But it just so happened that, I did mention it to them, and they were interested. So Sandy came for a year first and liked Barry, and Barry liked her. And then Joel joined her the following year. And then, so they were at Barry for 14 years. And it was like a miracle. I never thought I'd live in the same place with my twin sister. Yeah.
What a blessing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, when you said you went to school in Pennsylvania, was that for your undergraduate?
Yes, right.
Where?
I went to Wilson College in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. It was this school that my older sister had attended. And I loved it. I had a great experience. It was really focused on women and the gifts of women, being a women's college. And so from there, I went to Bryn Mawr and did some work in history. And in the midst of all that, I had this religious awakening, and so got into just following that path.
Is that how you got to Broadway?
Yeah, right. It is. If you mean Times Square, New York.
Right.
Yeah. I was teaching catechism when I was at graduate school in Bryn Mawr. I was teaching catechism at Our Lady of Good Counsel, and that was a Mercy Sister run school. And they had a catechetical conference with Father Bruce Ritter was the keynote speaker, and they asked me if I would attend that. And so I went to that, and it was a wonderful story of how this Franciscan priest had founded a shelter for homeless runaway teenagers in New York City, and they located in Times Square. And at the end of his very moving presentation, he said, I challenge anyone in the audience to come and live with me in community, give a year of your life, work with the homeless runaway teenagers, pray 3 hours a day. I'll pay you $12 a week, and come enjoy this experience. So, I mean, I was really taken with it. I knew that I wanted to do that.
And his home was called
Covenant House.
Covenant
yeah,
House.
And it was men and women lay volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like give a year of your life, or you could recommit as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I was 3 years with Covenant House.
How many volunteers were there?
We had 70, believe it or not, in
Wow.
one house.
Wow.
So we were in this high rise on 8th Avenue and 42nd Street. So, and the center was like a block away.
But $12 was bus fare.
Right. Right, and
New York.
yeah, I know, and but it was plenty, really, and so it was a fantastic experience because it was my way of kind of exploring the possibility of religious life without having to worry about any vows, and also it was a community of men and women, so I could still date and discern, can I. What do I really want to do with my life? And I mean, I love the prayer life. The 3 hours of prayer, we had morning prayer, we chanted the office, and then we'd have a half hour of silence where you could do whatever you wanted, spiritual reading, centering, whatever people wanted to do. Then we have evening prayer and Eucharist, and then we'd have night prayer. And we chanted all the office, it was really lovely. And then we committed to an hour of personal prayer besides that. So I loved that, and I had been developing my prayer life before I went to Covenant House, so I just had more experience of that. And
Nice rhythm.
yeah, and we had we were all encouraged to have a spiritual director. So and then we had a community, and then we worked with the homeless runaway teenagers, and I worked with the pregnant young women.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Rich experience.
It was really powerful.
I'm waiting for the moment that Adrian Dominican.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a long story. It's a long story. If I was going to go to Guatemala because we had a Casa Alianza in Antigua, and I was all set to go, and I had moved out of my job in New York and ready to go, and then a Franciscan priest had been assassinated, so they nixed the women going. The men had gone like 6 months before us, and then we were in Guatemala. Mm-hmm. So I'd already left where I was going. So we were opening a new Covenant House in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and they always would have a startup team of community members to go down for that. So I volunteered to do that since I was already in the transition, So I went down to Fort Lauderdale.
Well, we're getting closer when you say Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, right. And, and a Vermonter doesn't want to go to hot Florida, right? But we were a block and a half from the ocean, so that was not hard to take. I loved it, in fact. So we did the startup work there in Fort Lauderdale. And the first weekend I was there, I went on a prayer workshop. And PJ, or Mary Mullins at
Sister
the time,
Sister,
that's
happy
right,
memory.
exactly, was the MC of that workshop, and she had a priest and a lay woman there to do the day of prayer. And I was really taken with her because she had this joy and this sparkle in her eye, and she was so articulate about the faith. And yet she was, bent over with this curvature of the spine, and she was in a brace. But she just had a real life and an inner life and a love of God that just oozed out of her. And when she mentioned that she did spiritual direction, I asked her if she would be my spiritual director. So I would go and meet her every month. She lived right off Barry University.
That's right.
Down there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I would drive down there and meet with her.
Wow.
Yeah. And so we began to talk, and, about 6 months into the whole thing, because I was discerning a call to religious life, she started giving me the life of Dominic and the life of Catherine. And then she gave me the constitutions of the Adrian Dominican Sisters. Said, read this, She goes, you're a born Dominican, But, so I had no idea that she had been the novice mistress for 15 years in Adrian. So I sort of feel kind of caught, but it was a good thing. She was
Once a novice mistress.
Always, right. She was kind of my gateway into the community. And then I contacted Formation, and they gave me other sisters to meet. Then I went for an Exploring Religious Life weekend, and then I applied and entered in 1985.
1985.
Yeah, never been to Michigan. I mean, I never thought in a million years I would live in the Midwest.
Oh my.
You know.
Where were the candidates and the novices living at that time?
Well,
on campus here?
Yeah, the candidate year we lived in different communities. So I lived down in Oakwood with Sharon Weber and Eileen Rice and, you know, Viviana Cousteau and, you know, Celine Regan, who I love too. She was so funny. So that was my community candidate year. Then the novice year, we lived on 5th floor Weber. And we did
Who
our
was your director?
Eleanor Steck. So Jude Van Balen was the candidate director at the time, and then Eleanor Steck was the novice director. And we were doing an inter-community novitiate with, we'd go to Romero Center at the University of Detroit, Mercy, every week.
Oh.
And all the other novices from the different men and women's groups would attend that. It was a great experience.
Wow.
Yeah. And then my second year as a novice, we were the first to go to St. Louis and it was our Inter-Dominican House of Studies at that time. And that, after a couple years, morphed into the Common Dominican Novitiate. So it was great. There were 10 of us there from 5 different Dominican communities, and we really had a chance to have peers, you know, to have 10 peers that were in the same process as I was a real blessing.
So you had, you never wore the habit.
Never wore the habit.
Never had a religious name other than Sarah.
Correct.
Yes. How did you become immersed in the Dominican charism and history of not only of the Dominican order, but of our own congregation?
Well, you know, it's interesting, as Mary Mullins had said to me, you know, Sarah, you're living the Dominican charism. Contemplate and share the fruits of your contemplation. You know, she could see that in me. And just my own foundation in God and awareness of God's love for me was such a gift in my life. And it was just awakening to this love relationship that was very personal and real, and I wanted to grow and develop in it.
Did you ever have the desire to find out more about Dominic and where he lived? And
oh yeah, sure.
Did that ever come about?
Yes. You know, Mary, as I told you, gave me books about Dominic and Catherine, and you know, we certainly had that history in our formation. But then I had the opportunity to do the Lands of Dominic, the Parable Tour, back in 1990. Which was a wonderful experience where we go to Caleruega where Dominic was born and actually see the landscape that nurtured his vocation and the big mountains and broad valleys that just said the mercy of God is broad and the love of God is majestic. You know, it was just a wonderful setting to actually be in his home and see where his parents, you know, lived, and then we went to Ozma, where he was a priest there for a while, and then we went to Fanjeau and Pruy, where he started the first convent of women. And
you were so fortunate,
yes,
you know, as a young Dominican, to have that experience.
Yeah, and Aquinas Institute of Theology really helped with that, because I took a 3-credit course on the history of and spirituality of St. Dominic, and so they gave me the tuition toward the tour, and the tour was part of it, you know. So, and I worked with Nona McGrail, who's a great Cincinnati Dominican historian. So she lived right in Chicago, where I was ministering at that time. So anyway, it all worked out wonderfully.
Were there any other candidates or novices from Adrian that went with you to St. Louis?
No, you know what? Janelle Kramer was my other Adrian Dominican.
So just two?
It was just the two of us, and later, because in the this was 1990, and the Adrians weren't going on that tour as much, and then it really began to burgeon. And we had drawings, and people could win. People would go in 10 and 12 groups.
So you're a crowd of two.
We entered with 3, but one did not go on in the novitiate, so it was 2 of us.
That's a slim crowd.
It
Isn't
is. It's not.
You've celebrated 25 years already.
Yes. And the fun thing is we did that with the people who were celebrating 60 and 50 and 25. So I mean, Rebecca Hodge and I are a crowd, you know. And I think that's why the inter-Dominican novitiate was so important, because, you know, we connected. We had a crowd, but it was from other congregations. So, but yeah, you're a minority when I entered in '85. I did feel like a minority, because even the sisters who were only 10 or 12 years older than me had been in the congregation 25 years, because they entered at 18, whereas I entered at 29. Mm-hmm. So I was a little bit older and
had more experience. Obviously.
Right.
Mm-hmm. You earned a degree while you were there in St. Louis, didn't you?
Yes. So what I did is I had 1 year of theological study at St. Louis, and I had a few credits from Annalise Sinnott through Marygrove during formation. But then I worked at Our Lady of the West Side, teaching elementary school in an African American inner city school. And
where is this?
It's in on Independence. It's in Lawndale. Nora O'Brien was my principal in Chicago, and Kathy Klingon and Ann Beauvais had also worked in the. It was a school with 3 campuses. So I worked at presentation, and I was Sister Science. Science wasn't my big subject, but I taught reading and science and spelling and religion, and I also did phys ed, music, and art.
Welcome to the world.
Right, exactly. So I had actually done a summer with Nora O'Brien to kind of do parish ministry. I was supposed to get a look at what parish ministry is about. And she goes, Sarah, we really need a summer Bible school. So why don't you do that? So I said, okay, and put this 2-week summer Bible school together with kids age 5 to 15. I had a big range of young people. And, did it, created an environment, came up with lesson plans, did all kinds of things, went to the zoo. I mean, we did a whole bunch of things. And she goes, Sarah, you're a natural born teacher. I would hire you to teach at Our Lady of the West Side when you finish formation. And that was great, because I didn't have a master's degree. I didn't have any education courses either, but anyway, so I taught 4th grade, which was an easier grade than the reading. When you have the 1st and 2nd graders, you have to teach all those important reading and phonics and all that stuff, which I didn't know how to do. So anyway, I taught 4th grade, and I really learned so much about teaching doing 2 years of elementary school. And it really was crazy, because my first year, Nora said, now, Sarah, the class you're going to get is a notorious class. This one student had actually glued the 3rd grade teacher's coat together, like dumped glue down the same. And I had 4 sets of twins, LaRon and LaShawn and Lakeisha and Tanisha and the Cruz brothers, I called them. And so I had, and it was really
a challenge.
It was a challenge, but I really learned, and I told, I was telling my partners what was because we were the grades were, one teacher, Miss Fennell, taught the math, and then Miss Roberts taught the English. So we, in these 4th and 5th graders, and I did science. So
you all knew the
So
kids.
yeah, we all knew the same kid, and I could tell them what happened in the classroom, and they could give me tips on how to handle it. And Ethel Detz was also teaching kindergarten, and she was an expert, so she helped me a lot too. And
Great
Nora was.
teacher.
So I had a whole community of teachers helping me get this. And it really was a great experience. And the students, once I learned how to control the classroom better. It was good. But I
didn't get glued then.
I did not get glued. No. And the thing is, I remember then I knew that elementary school wasn't my thing, because I was an abstract thinker, and little kids are still in the concrete thinking stages. So When I went, after I got my master's, so I was doing the master's part-time as I was teaching and in the summers. And then when I finished the master's in theology, I went down to Barrie to be the campus minister.
Oh my heavens.
Yes, and so I had the opportunity.
Someone that knew you? Or?
Well, that's another good story. Actually, when I was at Covenant House in Fort Lauderdale, I read the Florida Catholic newspaper, and Jean O'Loughlin was featured in that paper. And it was her whole story about how she got into education, that she was on the trolley car. As a 12-year-old, she was going home from school in this trolley car, and she sat next to a black family and was helping. She noticed that the kids, every time the trolley stopped, the kids were falling, and the mother had like 5 kids to kind of handle. So she sat down with them and helped them, helped her with the kids and everything. And then when she got off her stop, another white man who had been on the trolley car spat in her face. And she went home to tell her father, why did he do that? And he said, ignorance. And she said, well, how do you cure ignorance? And he said, education. So that propelled her into her educational field. So when I got out of Aquinas and had homiletics with Joan Delaplane, Nadine Foley, the prioress at the time, said to me, now, Sarah, would you be willing to preach now that you've had homiletics? And I said yes. So I preached that noontime, and I happened to tell that story of Jean O'Loughlin as it fit the readings. And Jean O'Loughlin just came in that day, and all the sisters were telling her about how her story was part of the homily. And so she came up to me at dinner and said, hi, my name is Sister Jean O'Loughlin. I said, well, I'm Sara Fairbanks, and so she said, well, anytime you want to work at Barrie, let me know. So I went to apply for campus ministry at Barrie. And of course, one of our sisters had just been hired for the position, but Jean created another position so that I could be there.
Her.
Yeah, she's great. And so I taught theology one course a semester, along with the campus ministry, doing RCIA and retreats and social outreach and all of that kind of stuff.
So teaching was in your life.
So teaching was still there, and I walked into. I was really nervous about teaching college students, and I walked in and I had the first class, and I thought, this is a piece of cake. I mean, this is nothing like 4th grade, where you have to have a new, lesson every 15 minutes to keep their attention. No, and it was just a, and I knew I had that 3 years of experience of discerning what I really wanted to do, and I knew that teaching was it. And so I asked to study and got approved for study, and so I went on to the University of Toronto.
So you're a doctor now.
Yes, right. Right.
Little did you know.
That's right.
Little did you know. And here you've come full circle.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's really been, interesting, because after 17 years at Barrie, back again, I really discerned this call to do vocation work for the congregation. So, and it's just a different way of using my gifts and preaching and teaching. And little did I know I would get into all of this social media work.
May I say full force. Full steam ahead.
I know, like first the blogs, and then the vlogs and all these little interviews we're doing.
Well, you and
Lorraine.
Lorraine have done a wonderful job with your interviews.
Yeah, thanks.
And more recent, I just viewed the video on prayer.
I know.
What is it, about a 4-minute?
Yes, it's beautiful. I mean, Scott and the communication department did such a great job. We had 60 minutes of interviews, and we viewed them all, and we had to name the clips we would use. But do you know how hard it is to make 4 minutes out of 60 minutes, and to know what to clip and how to put it all together? So it's pretty incredible.
And he did that. Who did you interview for this segment?
The prayer, we did Carol Johannes, Zia Mara, and Patty Harvett. Yeah.
And so you're going to do
So
different
then we
ones,
have,
right?
yeah, so we're going to do the 4 pillars, and we have 3 people for each of those interviews, those different pillars.
Sarah, isn't it difficult in this day and age to find the spark of young women or, adult, mature women that are interested in religious life? I mean, vow life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, we're in a new beginning. And I think it's hard for young people to enter a community of elderly, where the majority of people are much older. And they don't meet sisters in their schools and parishes in the way they
Of the
did
past,
before
yeah.
Vatican II. And there's so many other options for them. And you can do ministry and be married.
Yes.
So there's a lot more opportunities and options for young people today. And so to make a commitment to religious life is a real special calling.
Do you get discouraged?
Sometimes just living with the reality. But I really feel happy in my ministry. I mean, I enjoy talking with young women who are seriously discerning life choices, and they may choose married life, but to have a role in helping them with that discernment, I enjoy. And I know that we have a few women who are, seriously considering religious life, so that's a positive.
Yes.
So I look for the positive, and I also, this whole idea of, preaching through social media and getting people to see religious through social media is kind of a new frontier in a way. For me, certainly. I mean, for young people, they've grown up with the social media, but to know a lot of women, we ask them, how did you find out about religious life? They'll say through social media. So that is kind of a new world for me.
When did, along the line of your journey, did you realize your gift for preaching?
Well, I would say I had homiletics with Joan Delaplane. And I think one thing is I always enjoyed preaching, listening to good preaching. And so when in formation, when our sisters said, would you be willing to go to Aquinas Institute and take homiletics? I thought, wow, yeah, that would be great. And so we did, and from being in that class with Joan, I could see the talented women in that class. The women were preaching as well or better than the men. And so that was because I thought, why don't women preach? I mean, did God leave women out of the revelatory loop? I mean, did Jesus not, tell Mary Magdalene, go and preach the good news of my resurrection? I mean, I say, why is it that only men preach in our church from the pulpit? And so to have that class just really opened my horizons. And the guys told us, because the guys would go on for 2 and 3 courses in preaching, whereas the women just took the introductory course and had to take other courses. We weren't going the preaching track, right? So the guys would come up and say to us, we miss you. Your class just isn't as good without you. So, and then when I went to Barry to do campus ministry, we were a team of 4, a Cincinnati Dominican, myself, our director who was a lay woman, and the Dominican priest. And so we would take turns preaching at the evening student liturgy. So the students were hearing 3 women preach every month, so they certainly had an experience of lay preaching, and I always enjoyed it, and it really tapped into my own prayer life and spirituality, and just a way to express the unconditional love of God, which is the best news there is. I mean, it is the treasure of our life. So to be able to talk about that in a lot of different ways is a joy to me. And I would say I preach to myself, so every homily, I get a lot out of them. And so I hope other people do too, it's that kind of thing.
I think that's why you make such a wonderful preacher. I look forward to
Oh,
you
thanks, yeah.
preaching for us,
Uh-huh.
without a doubt. And one last thing, who are the people living or deceased that have inspired you throughout your life?
Yeah, I mean, even as a child, I would say the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and his powerful speeches that just united the nation to fight for the civil rights movement. Mother Teresa, who preaches with her life and just puts that gospel into practice with her love for the poor. I would say many of my teachers who just had a love of life and of learning, and the my Dominican sisters, many of them. I think of Mary Mullins, for instance,
Yes.
who was an inspiration, and Nadine Foley, and Nora O'Brien, and just so many of the sisters that I have lived with and worked with who have really been an inspiration to me. Joan Delaplane being, one of the first women to be in the Homiletic Society of America, and then as president of that, the first Catholic and the first woman to do that. Kathy Hilkerd was my theology professor.
She's a Dominican.
It's a Dominican, an Akron Dominican
Akron.
at Aquinas. I would say, to my IHM sisters, Margaret Brennan was my spiritual director, and Mary Ellen Sheehan was my dissertation director. So just a lot of the women, to think that women weren't even allowed to get theological degrees before Vatican II. It was just a rare case. There was one program, I think, in the United States. And then after Vatican II, the church opened the doors of theological study for women and lay people. So it was just a great thing to see, like Elizabeth Johnson and some of those great women theologians who have led the way, have done brilliant work and been such models for leadership in the church. So, and our pastoral leaders and our women who, the Jean Hugheses and the Carol Costins and Pat Seaman and all the women who have done work in justice advocacy are inspirations to me as well.
When I think of your life now, as you have shared, I'm overwhelmed by the providence of God bringing you to Fort Lauderdale.
Right.
And bringing Mary Mullins to Fort
Exactly.
Lauderdale.
Yeah.
I mean, that was an electric moment.
Yeah. I mean, I could have been in Antigua, Guatemala.
Yes.
And never been in Fort Lauderdale.
Or Franciscan.
Right.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
You're welcome.
And in the name of all our sisters, may your life become richer, and bless all the young women that are fortunate enough to cross your path.
Thank you, Jo.